Hi, I'm Mette Stannow. I'm a managing director with Accenture Song, the world's largest tech-powered creative group. And I've spent my entire career in marketing and communications, and also working a lot in recent years with digital innovation. I help clients with marketing transformation. In the last year or so, with the onset of generative AI coming onto the scene, I'm also very much looking at what can be done with generative AI, how it can reinvent marketing, and helping clients work that out. So, hi Harry, pleasure to be with you here today. Would you mind just giving us the two-sentence version of you, of Reef 100?
Yeah, I'm an artist and director from London. I'm neurodivergent, and I started in voice and performance, but moved much more into research and art and tech. Effectively, my studio uses the human voice to explore emerging tech holistically. We collaborate all over the world, but it's really to try and produce new narratives around technology and hopefully make some amazing art along the way.
Amazing. And would you mind summarizing the talk that you have given at the next conference?
Yeah, so the session was really referencing this idea of augmented intelligence. Augmentation is quite a tired term, but I think at the very heart of it is still a really important idea now that the masses have more accessibility to generative and accessibility to more and more powerful AI. We're starting to really think about how we can have these second selves. Whether you're a poet or a lawyer, we're really needing to develop our AI literacy to think about embracing these tools. So a lot of my work argues that outside of the functionality and the profound power of a technology, the narratives around it, the stories, are actually what allow the wider society to embrace such an opportunity. So one of the key sentiments that my work argues is that people really need to develop new stories and narratives so that society embraces the new technology, and it also allows people to augment and effectively reach demographics that tech institutions and traditional institutions can't when you tell an incredible story. So I share a set of portfolio pieces that effectively show our narratives around emerging tech and specifically AI.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I watched your amazing performance this morning at the next opening, and I think it's amazing what you do. You transport your audience into this incredible soundscape just with the power of your voice and AI. So how did you get to this place of human and machine and the augmented artistry that you do?
Yeah, so I grew up in East London on a council estate, a very rough situation. I grew up in a neurodivergent home. Even though my parents did their best, it was a very unstructured environment. And in my early teens, my first sort of obsession and actually was chess. So I was a tournament chess player in my teens, and many of my contemporaries in chess were middle class. So they had coaches, they could travel. And my dad decided to actually buy me a chess engine, which is an early chess AI. And it was actually through this system that was unrelenting. It never got bored of playing me, and it never really questioned. My level of play exponentially grew. And I had a very early, nearly 20 years ago, human and AI partnership that I embraced. And I saw it as an opponent that pushed me in a way that really developed what I was interested in and fascinated by. So 15 years later, in the world of voice and beatbox culture, when I had my first opportunities to do academic institutional collaboration, tech and specifically machine learning and AI became more readily available to me. And I remembered that sentiment. And I think it's because of my relationship with chess and game theory, where it's very established that these systems you can augment with and become a centaur and develop your skills. I really lent into that with my specialism, which was voice. And in my world, my job was to collect and understand as many vocal techniques as there are humanly possible and push them to the absolute edge. And the question I asked was, well, if this can push game theory, games like chess and Go, into new echelons of ability and skill, can that happen with art? Can that happen with my voice? So the last 6 years, I've embraced many different smart systems, many different collaborations, bespoke models to APIs, exploring how these tools can augment, change, develop my technical ability and voice.
Fascinating. And at what point did you really realize the potential of the technology? Was it you were experimenting and it was gradual, or was there like a breakthrough moment?
It's interesting because the very first few experiments that I did, my contemporaries absolutely hated it. Like, there was no one in my sort of the digital fine art world or in the music world that when I started sharing these like generative versions of my voice, there was a lot of discomfort, and I found that fascinating because I never felt that. I felt excitement, and the reason I felt excitement is I've spent 20,000 hours practicing a very, very hyper specialism. I have a lexicon of phrases and patterns. I understand how I can generate melody, how I can generate percussion. And the idea that I can now ideate, and I started to hear these new phraseologies, like these new patterns that were from me, but also not me. And there was something in that latent space that was very, very fascinating as someone that became a world-class hyper specialist in something very, very specific. But I think the better you get at something, the more you reach the tip of an expertise mountain, you have less and less resource to pull from. And tiny margins of progression completely make huge differences for the peak of expertise. And I don't just mean my expertise, I think holistically across all expertise. So what I loved was to hear these new ideas, and that was the aha moment. I was like, wow, I can see new things. I can be heard and observe and be challenged in brand new ways. And it was from that point I didn't really look back.
No, it's super interesting because I think a lot of creatives are in fact afraid, as you mentioned, of AI, and particularly now generative AI, which is changing AI from helping us analyze to truly helping us create, and it's in the hands of everybody now, right? Within the past year. So what would be your advice to designers, photographers?
So I categorize AI augmentation into 3 types of partnerships. We have mentorship, collaboration, and opposition. So most people are very familiar with the idea of sort of collaboration or mentorship when it comes to technology, because for a long time, computation, but just even digital technology has provided sounds or ideas, and even a pocket calculator has the capacity to do things that human beings can't, right? So there's nothing new there. But we accept that these systems, even in a non-AI context, can support us, and that's very established, and we're comfortable with using a pocket calculator or using a VST. The difference now is that these systems are able to respond directly from your intelligence, and that's where people become afraid. Like from your data, from your contribution. So the really interesting thing that I would advise is this scary part as the opposition. When something feels like it's going to take an opportunity from you or in some way become better than you, I would say seek out ownership of that opposition. And what I mean by that is I have 100 hours of vocal performance, screaming, singing, beatbox phrases, multiphonics. That is all me. And it's almost like this data identity through sound, which I use to generate these AI second selves. And when I started to hear these phrases, there was a point where they started to generate ideas that I couldn't do. So what did I feel? I felt uncomfortable. I felt challenged. But by leaning into that, and over the last 3 years of this constant rehearsal and training, just like a chess match, it's actually the opposition where the greatest opportunity lies, because it's in that where you are pushed into discomfort. And when we are uncomfortable as experts, we grow. So I would say, yeah, your narrative and your fear is justified on some levels, but creatively, like, are you taking full advantage of how these systems can push your limits, push your limitations? And that's when I think the most interesting things happen.
Where do you see the technology going in the next 5-year horizon and maybe 10-year horizon?
Yeah, so one thing I will say is there is going to be some incredible art. beyond what anyone thinks is capable, beyond any sort of human alone capacity. There is going to be these like stunning expressions, and a phrase that I really like is that we're moving into the age of beholdment. And there's been a few examples where systems have generated ideas that have changed how humans maybe approach expertise, but it's happening in game theory all the time. And game theory is really important because it offers like an intellectual framework that really allows for an objective representation of where the technology might go. And first you had humans better than these systems, then these systems started to beat good players, then they started to be world-class players. Now these systems are, whether it's chess or Go, better than the world's best players, right? So scary, but what's really interesting is now all human players are augmented. They're now able to play and think in a way. And there's this term, they become centaurs. And I think that is going to happen across the board, where whatever the current expertise is or the peak of the mountain, these systems will enhance and push that forward. And there's a famous Go move. It's Game 3, Move 37, with AlphaGo playing the world's greatest Go player. And he described this move as a beautiful move. And all of the Go community believed that this was a bad move, it's a mistake. But from that point forward, it became an insight which was integrated into human play. And that's a mutational contribution. It's not just generative, like kind of regurgitory generative, which you can see a lot of human level re-representation with AI. There's occasionally these moments where something truly new happens, and that will become more and more and more common. And in the realms of art, it's going to lead to, stunning, wonderful, awe-inspiring new opportunities if we embrace it. And yes, we can be careful. But in terms of like the potential, I think that's exciting as an artist.
Absolutely. And what about if we move outside of arts, if we move into, creative industries, perhaps more broadly, but also the personal realm? What do you think would be the outlook of the technology?
Well, I mean, so I come from a working class background. I talk a lot about AI and working class. I think that now that these tools are so accessible, what's interesting, I went back to the council estate that I grew up on, and talking with young people that are starting to use GTP4, it can sound quite sad as a narrative, but as someone who had a difficult upbringing, intelligence isn't as definitely wasn't as readily available. And when I say intelligence, it could be a simple insight from knowing how to tie your shoelaces to how you should like structure your books for school, right? And what's really interesting is I think there are parts of society and parts of the world that have not had such fluent access that these more secure homes or sort of more wealthy countries have had access to, or can be slightly complacent of. And I think what we'll see is more and more how this intelligence on tap allows for people that have not had the same opportunity to step into roles or step into I guess just whole new aspects of creating ideas that I think is really, really meaningful. And that's something that's very important to me, is that emerging tech isn't for just the wonderful kind of institutions that are out there. More and more there are individuals that would never ever think that they could achieve something, and these systems will support them to do that. So I really, really care about that subject. And as someone that will fight for art, I think that's one of the best things to come out of this revolution.
Yeah, so it increases social mobility, in fact, and probably also democratizes access to education, right? Knowledge, intelligence. Amazing. So just briefly on this question of authenticity, you mentioned, that the technology is able to obviously copy, regurgitate, but also stitch different pieces together. But what do you think happens to authenticity? I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, for artists, for brands, etc. Quite a key question. If the technology is able to sort of replicate many things that are already out there in the realm, right?
Yeah. Well, so I think the big word here is regulation, right? And when we talk about regulation, I think the key sentiment is actually consent. And the word that you use, authenticity, one thing that a lot of people don't have access to is to use their own data sets to generate outcomes. So when you have these very large sprawling models that are trained on just lots of holistic data, I think it's very hard to be authentic. There are more and more great systems that are supporting ethical data sets that aren't pulling from sort of human intelligence to produce works that they didn't consent to. So I think as things move forward, we'll really be able to update those systems. I know that Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst have done a really interesting metadata system where people can opt out or opt in of their data sets and their contributions to generative models. But I think people should start to collect their own data. I think people should see that they are going to be able to generate and create things, and that can apply to brands, and it can apply to studios and agencies. It's like, okay, so we're running a generative model, but it's off all of our creativity, our team, our creative team, like all of the work that they have, they've consented to generate something. So I think it's going to be more and more important that the systems that create the work will be reviewed, much like food, where does this come from? What's the calorie count? Is it ethically sourced? We'll have very, very system-based sort of observations that will allow for kind of ethical contribution. I don't know if we'll get to the point where you start seeing content and it says human-made, but I think that's really, really important. And another point would be about blockchain and making sure that authentic content is coming from the source that you think it is. I think that's a genuinely scary prospect, that we no longer know what is human and what is machine, but I think there's lots of systems that can support that.
Good. So systems around the AI, no, for sure, that will come too. Who in the field of AI do you admire and why?
Interesting. Well, I mean, I have a lot of contemporaries that have really, really inspired me. There's someone that was at the event called Mio Leclerc, who runs a company called Journey. We actually did a performance together at the UN, but the way he thinks about machine learning and AI with choreography and just generally as a computational artist is really, really stunning. And he has this ability to be philosophical and understand how to communicate to cultures that would not normally turn their head to AI. But his ability to generate sculpture, movement, build stories is absolutely stunning. There's also a friend of mine called Sugwen Chung, who is a computational artist who works with robotics. So she produced a large data set of her movement and her visual art, and she's able to then paint in real time with a robotic structure. So I think within my culture, there's lots of different terms for it, but I call it artists that are creating second selves. They create these partners or these entities that they can kind of interact with, and in that they become something more. So that is something I find very, very inspiring.
Amazing. And this notion of a second self AI, what could that mean to me, the person in the street, people other than artists?
Yeah, so I think the more like clinical term is an agent, where if you're a lawyer, a poet, a personal trainer, you'll be able to effectively create these nodes of information, whether you personify that or not, whether you label that as something that is subhuman, part human, or just as a simple tool, right? It doesn't really matter. The main thing is, the argument I'm making is that it doesn't matter what expertise you do. The ability to generate mentorship, collaboration, and opposition to generate insight is going to apply to across the board. And I think this idea of expertise 2.0 is really interesting. The main thing that gets in the way of people embracing these tools are the narratives and the stories that we have, mostly associated with science fiction. So I think being able to reference, to check if your edit is working right, to set these tools, to send emails, to riff, to effectively generate a film that you've never seen before and has never existed in the world. This is something that we're moving into, pulling information out of the latent space for your expertise or your craft, your discipline, whatever it is you're passionate about.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. Accessible to all. You know, you mentioned the fact that a lot of people are scared potentially of the technology, and you've done some work with angst. So how do you think we can work with, you know, our fears and basically reach something better? How do we address that fear aspect that many, you know, are confronted with regards to AI?
Yeah, I mean, outside of like automation and the very real aspect of this, that it will change jobs. I don't think it's as simple as jobs are going to be lost. I think it's going to disrupt how people work more than it's going to take work away, like across the board. So I would say that when it comes to creation or discipline or expertise, growth comes from discomfort. Like it's moving into an uncomfortable place where I think real progress happens. And it's like life can bring you discomfort, or you can walk in and own the discomfort. And I think that applies to these technologies. I understand that it's intimidating to see an artwork generated, or to, effectively be given law advice, which is passing a bar test already. That will disrupt how people work. But if you do this and this, I think your box will just become smaller and smaller. My argument is that just like learning a new skill, developing your AI literacy will future-proof anything that you're doing. And that's why we do the work that we do, is to make sure that as many people as possible from as many minorities or demographics are able to kind of go, oh, well, there is something here for me, and this is something that can reach in a different potential, and I'm going to embrace that. And that's something that everyone can sort of pursue with a healthy and beneficial mindset.
So you mentioned that you really feel AI will be, you know, beneficial to humans. So what are some of the things we've got to get right to make sure that happens?
Education. I think education is the most important thing, where people are understanding how these tools work. And I also just think to rewrite the narratives around the technology so that people don't come into it with narratives of fear. There's a little bit more hope and accessibility. That's what lets people actually observe it objectively. We all know if you're afraid of something or if you're insecure, you can't see things clearly. So I think it's that education part, especially for younger generations, to understand that will lead to a fluency that I think will just permeate culture.
Fantastic. You are now doing research in collaboration with some very esteemed institutions, Harvard and UCL, you mentioned, and also doing work for the United Nations. Can you briefly talk us through that?
So each of those would be different projects, but effectively it all comes under the gauze of AI, creativity, machine learning, collaboration, human-machine discussion. For me, it's always centered around voice, but we also are just very interested in strategy when it comes to narrative creation, storytelling around these systems. But primarily, we really want to be able to continue to produce artworks that predict maybe how companies, agencies, institutions, and individuals might interface with these tools. One example is we produced an international ballet which incorporated AI process across every level, from the set design to the music direction, the costume, choreography, and even down to the narrative. The tools were effectively given to all the senior creatives. So all of the research is to understand effectively what's out there, how we're developing stories, and then applying it into the real world.
Obviously, in this theme of the conference, what's next for you?
A lot of talks. So I'm speaking a lot for the rest of the year. but we have a set of partnerships. I have a project where we generate gemstones from voices. So we produce digital gemstones and physical sculptures where we're collecting voices from all over the world. We've replaced 12 diamond engagement rings with voice-generated artifacts, basically generated from the laughter between lovers. And we're interested in continuing to explore that project, and that project's called Voice Gems, which we're doing a lot of next year, and continuing research, performance, experimentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I think I would like one of those voice gems, so might have to get onto my husband about that one. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Great
Pleasure.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.